I'm Rick Harp. This is your APTN News Brief for Friday, April 12th. We lead off in the Yukon, where a recent Territorial Court of Appeal decision had one First Nation breathing a sigh of relief. At issue, mineral exploration in an area of great ecological importance to the Na-Cho First Nation. Exploration the Yukon government had initially greenlit. Sarah Connors has more.
The First Nation of Na-Cho Nyäk is celebrating what it says is a landmark victory. The Yukon Court of Appeal has dismissed an appeal launched by the Yukon government. At the center of the case is Sigh, or the Beaver River watershed, an area of untouched wilderness on the First Nations traditional territory. In 2021, the government signed off on a mineral exploration project which would conduct exploration activities in the watershed for 10 years. That approval didn't set well with the First Nation, which does not yet have a land use plan in place. That same year, the First Nation took the government to court, decrying what they say was a lack of consultation when it came to approving the project. They won the case in January 2023. But in November 2023, Yukon government appealed, arguing the judge erred in their decision and that it did adequately consult with the First Nation. However, Tuesday's decision disagrees, stating the judge did not err. Na-Cho Nyäk Chief Donna Hope said in a release the decision shows Yukon government acted unlawfully and dishonorably by approving the project in the first place. She hopes it sparks a shift in how the territory approaches treaty implementation. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
A proposed Senate bill formally recognizing Haida rights was in committee on Wednesday. Known as Bill S-16, or the Haida Recognition Act, it would see Canada formally recognize the rights to self-determination and governance of the Haida Nation and the Council as its government. Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations Gary Anandasangari spoke Wednesday about S-16 to the Senate Committee on Indigenous Peoples.
If this bill is passed by Parliament, it will solidify that both Canada and the province of British Columbia legally recognize the Haida Nation as a holder of inherent rights of governance and self-determination, and that the Council of the Haida Nation is authorized to exercise and make decisions regarding those rights.
3 Innu chiefs have accused the Quebec government of acting in bad faith concerning the proposed Patapan Treaty. The chiefs say over a year has passed since the agreed-upon deadline to conclude negotiations, a delay that risks jeopardizing the treaty. Negotiated between 3 Innu First Nations and the governments of Quebec and Canada, it recognizes their right to self-determination. However, Chief Gilbert Dominique of Montreal said negotiations were meant to conclude at the end of March 2023, but Quebec then reneged and imposed a new deadline. He says the province is now trying to renegotiate key aspects of the treaty. Meanwhile, Innu worked to secure a deal they reached with Canada. They've also requested a meeting with Quebec Premier François Legault.
Il ne restait que le Québec.
All that remained was for Quebec to finalize the agreement. At the end of the day, there's still what I call the economic deal to be reached at the negotiating table, which includes a financial settlement from Quebec. There were also other issues with Quebec. The concept of the inherent right to self-determination is beyond them. They are not in a position to accept it at the moment. We've asked them for a legal basis, but they haven't provided an answer at this stage.
Hi, I'm Dennis Ward, host of Face to Face. Coming up on our next episode, I'll be sitting down with Carrie Swanson, the CEO of the Indigenous Screen Office. We'll be discussing the excitement and big changes that have been happening on the screen and what stable funding will mean for future projects. Tune in Tuesday on APTN or listen to the Face to Face podcast. Download and subscribe on your favorite player.
A Nunavut community has lost its only connection by air to the rest of the territory. Made up of some 900 people, Sanikiluwak sits on an island in Hudson's Bay, about 150 kilometers off the coast of Quebec. And back in 2021, the airline Arctic Fresh began flights to and from the capital city of Iqaluit, a route they canceled last week, claiming the end of territorial subsidies in January 2023 made flights out of Sanikiluwak unfeasible. Now, residents trying to access other parts of the territory have to fly through southern cities such as Ottawa. Ryan Hagan speaks for Arctic Fresh. He claims there were other ways the government of Nunavut, or GN, could have supported the route.
I think one of the biggest things that the GN could have done was put a little bit more duty travel and medical travel on this scheduled flight, and that in itself probably would have supported the flight quite a bit more. In this particular case, we reached out to the GN on a number of scenarios, and we had hoped that there would have been some further support from the GN, but we were unsuccessful in our attempts.
And finally, sexual abuse charges this week against a chief in Manitoba have stirred up difficult emotions, all the more so because the alleged victim is a child. Yet such cases can also end up in a cone of silence. Here to speak to that issue, our Truth and Politics panel, columnist Negan Sinclair and consultant Jennifer Lewitz.
It's not something that's spoken about in our communities, but it's certainly evident because it was, where did we learn this abuse from? Simon Fraser University did a study just a couple years ago, and that study showed that approximately 50% of all Indigenous females interviewed had experienced abuse, sexual abuse in their lifetime. And for men, it was 1/3. The reality is that each one of us, if we have not experienced that abuse, are related to, live with, married to a person who has been abused. We have to talk about it. We can't have it silently in the shadows, so that what happens is these continual issues that bubble up when someone is found guilty of that abuse, or in this case, charged with that abuse. We have to believe survivors when they talk, and we also have to talk about this much more openly in the fact that many really abusive behaviors, sexually abusive behaviors, have become normalized in our communities as a result of colonialism. Silence is an easier option, but it will take collectivity, meaning people coming together and believing one another, standing beside one another. And most oftentimes in our communities, these are done very proactively through our ceremonies and through our circles, thinking about the ways people can come together as a result of actions like this, which can be extremely hard, but that's the heavy lifting that it takes to be a part of a community.
I think, number one, making sure that communities have the resources is incredibly important. You know, people talking about it is one thing. There's obviously a distrust between First Nations and the RCMP. How do we bridge that gap to have the conversations with people in law enforcement? And also, what resources are available for when and if those conversations are opened? And then after the fact, you know, the legal process has to take its course. What resources are available for people to be able to get help? But I think right now it's just making sure that people know that there's no shame in talking about what happened to you. And I know that there is a lot of people that carry that shame and guilt with them to talk about their experience. As we open up the conversation more and allow survivors and people that are victims of abuse to speak out, I think we're going to hear more about it. And, you know, it is an intergenerational thing. I echo what was said earlier about how it's learned. And unfortunately, when you don't know any different, those cycles are just repeating themselves over and over again.
And that's your APTN News Brief for Friday, April 12th. I'm Rick Harp.